Well, I think there's a lot of truth in it. I mean, when the top dog, the hegemon, begins to feel under challenge from another country, its likely reaction is to try and resist that challenge and to try and consolidate its position. And I think that helps to explain what the American attitude is. Well, I think that in this situation, the aggressor is clearly the United States. It's trying to hold on to something it thinks it's its right, which is to be the boss, if you like, of more or less all the things which it thinks should be the boss of. And China's reaction is actually quite different. China's reaction is it doesn't want to have this fight. It thinks there must be a better way of resolving the problems. And therefore, when it does respond or retaliate, it's gentler, and you feel it doesn't really have its heart in it. It doesn't really feel that this is the way to go. But if the Americans are going to be like this, of course they need to do something in response. Now, what they've done in response has been rather less than what the Americans have done in the first instance, and I think that will carry on. I don't think that China doesn't want to behave in any way which is likely to give further encouragement to the Americans to play the game like this. So they'll think very long and hard about, for example, if they decide to sell their treasury bills or something like that, American treasury bills. I think that the Chinese would think very, very carefully about that. They want to, if possible, reduce tension, not increase tension. Well, I think that you can't really summarize the condition of an economy or the trends of the economy by looking at the Dow Jones Index or NASDAQ. They're subject to a variety of different forces. What really matters is the state of the real economy. And the truth is that America's been in decline for actually quite a long time. If you take proportion of global GDP, America's been in decline since, well, actually before the 80s, but over a long period. So now it accounts for what, something like 15% of global GDP, less than measured by purchasing power parity, less than China. And you can see in geopolitical sense, that America is definitely not the power it was. Africa, even Latin America, let alone East Asia, now the most important economic region in the world. China's much more important economically in this region than the United States. So I don't think there's any doubt at all. The doubt is that there's a general attitude in society. There are two reasons for it. One, when a country's been top dog for a long time, people think somehow or other it's going to last forever because it's been a permanent fixture in their own lives for so long. No, that can't really be happening, can it? And the other reason is because the Americans are in denial about it. They say, no, of course we're not. I mean, Obama in the State of the Union address said, no, of course anyone who talks about American decline, it's nonsense. So it's not just Trump, well, actually, ironically, Trump is the guy that says America's in decline. And I'm the guy who's going to put it right, America first. But he's right that it's been in decline, but he's wrong that he's going to sort it out. Well, I think that, look, the world is unquestionably made up of different civilizations or different civilizational inheritances. Likewise, the world is made up of many different cultures. One of the problems of the Anglo-American era of history, which starts from the late 18th century with the British Industrial Revolution and spreads its tentacles across the world through colonization and so on, is that it came to regard itself to be superior to all other forms of culture and governance, and sought very consciously, if you like, to engineer them in a different way. I mean, what was colonization about other than the spread of the values of civilization of Europe, including, of course, to America and the destruction of the Native Americans. So I think that the West has a deep problem in understanding the variety of civilizations in the world and respecting them, because for so long it's thought disrespectfully of them. It's thought that they should be shaped and changed in a way which was closer to the West, because the West is the civilization. So that's been the mentality. And it's been very damaging around the world for many cultures. And what is true now, I think, is that there's definitely an element of this in the Sino-American argument. Because if you look at what the Americans are arguing, the Americans are really taking upon themselves to say, we don't like you subsidizing your companies and your industries in the way that you're doing. We don't think you should have targets for 2025 and developing world-leading companies in these areas and so on. Now, what the Americans are really saying is, in terms of sovereignty questions, is we don't accept the reform and opening up project which Deng Xiaoping launched in 1978, which has led to the most remarkable economic transformation in human history. Now, you might ask the question, what right have the Americans to tell a country like China, which is 2,400 years old as opposed to 250 years old as America, whatever the exact figures are, how they should govern their country, what sort of economy they can have, and so on. So I think this is a lack of respect for another country, another culture, another civilization. It's a gross interference in their sovereignty. But we're not surprised by this, are we? Because we've seen this over a long historical period from the United States. So you're right, there is a civilizational element to this. That was a sly question. Okay, I can't hide it any longer. Yes, I am writing a book. but it takes me a long time. You know, my first book, well, it wasn't my first book, my first really big book, which was When China Rules the World, took me a long time. I mean, it's partly because very soon after I started, my wife died in very terrible circumstances, so I lost several years because I just couldn't work in that period. And our son was only 16 months, so you know, I was a single parent caring for him and so on, and bringing him up. So it took me, the book took me probably 10 years, but maybe 4 or 5 years was when I couldn't really work on it properly. So anyway, yeah, I'm working on a new book. It's on what kind of great power China is going to be. What will China be like as a great power? That's the theme of it. And I've written about half of it. So there's a long way to go. I mean, well, it's a difficult question to reply to because, you know, you think, you know, if you think about your own life and you said, and you start something new, and you say, well, when did it really start? Do you know what I mean? And various things have been germinating and so on before you actually say really start it. But I would say that I began my first sort of significant moves were in 2015, and then I really started much more in 16, 17, 18. So I've done definitely 3 years on it so far. Maybe in some ways slightly less, in some ways slightly more. It's very difficult to measure it because, you know, when you're in the early days on a book, you're not working on it all the time because you're not really, you know, I like my books to sort of grow organically in me, you know. At least, no. Well, I would be very disappointed if it was 4 years. I think I can probably finish the first draft by the end of next year, or or you know, maybe less than 2 years. But that's the first draft, and then it will depend a lot on how much work it needs for the second draft. And what my editor says, and